Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Appium Panel Discussion. Before we get started, I would like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You have joined the presentation listening using your computer speaker system by default. If you would prefer to join over the telephone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dial-in information will be displayed. You will have the opportunity to submit text questions to today's presenters by typing your questions into the questions pane of the control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will collect these and address them during the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Today's webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a follow-up email within 24 to 48 hours with a link to view the recording. I would now like to introduce Isaac McGee, Director of Open Source at Sauce Labs.
Hello, good morning. Welcome to the Appium webinar, Let's Talk Appium. With the upcoming Appium conference in London, which happens on April 6th, with the workshops the day before on April 5th. This webinar will largely be about Appium conference and talking about the talks and the impetus behind the conference in general. So we have with us a few of the participants in the conference. But first, I'd like to say what the workshops in particular are that are coming up on April 5th. One is on advanced Appium, presented by folks from ThoughtWorks, and then two from people from Sauce Labs. One about working on real devices with Appium, and one on continuous testing, with hooking up your CI system for mobile applications. Tickets are still available. Standard tickets end on March 23rd, and there are coupon codes out now. So my name is Isaac McGee, as was said. I am the head of open source at Sauce Labs and have been an Appium contributor for about 4 years now, and continue to work on that as well as my duties at Sauce Labs. So I'd like to go around the room and introduce the people on the panel. So I guess just to say your role, where you're working, your career, anything else you might want to say about yourself, as well as your experience with Appium, where it stems, where it lies. So we'll start with Jonathan.
Hi everyone, I'm Jonathan Lips, and it's a real pleasure to be here talking about Appium Conference. I run a little consulting firm called Cloud Gray, which is all about mobile automation, helping clients be successful with Appium and so on. I've been involved with the Appium project for quite a while, from the very beginning, more or less, over 5 years ago, and still very involved with the project. And it's a sort of a personal dream come true for me to see AppiumConf happening. We talked about it years and years ago, and every year we thought, is this the year of AppiumConf? I don't know, and it's finally coming around. So I'm really excited about that and looking forward to this discussion. As part of the organizing committee for AppiumConf, I'm just super thrilled about the quality of talk proposals we received, and we're going to have an excellent program. So hopefully we'll get to learn a little bit about what we're going to be talking about there today.
Excellent. Charlene and Charlotte?
Hi guys, my name is Charlene. I'm a QA manager for Capital One.
My name is Charlotte, and I'm a mobile automation engineer for Bleacher Report.
Yeah, so we're very excited today to talk about Appium Conference. We're very excited about the conference in general. It'll be our first time in London. Yeah. And yeah, we've been using Appium for
a few years
3
now.
years
yes.
now. We implemented it in Capital One using the Screen Objects framework, which we will be talking about at the conference. So it's a wrapper that's on top of Appium.
Yes, and this is also our very first conference talk, and we're very grateful and thankful for the organizing team and for Appium Conference for considering us and inviting us to do this talk and share this knowledge that we have about screen objects.
Well, thanks for submitting an awesome proposal.
All right, and our final participant is Danielle.
Hi everyone, excited to be here. So I'm Daniel. I'm heading the SDK development part in ApplyTools, where we do automatic visual testing. Appium is definitely one of the most popular frameworks that we need to integrate with. And lately we actually added a very large contribution of code to Appium specifically for UI capabilities. And I'll be giving a talk about that at AppiumConf as well. So yeah, very excited to be here, very excited to be at AppiumConf soon.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us this morning. First off, I expect that many of the people attending this webinar are familiar with Appium, very familiar in some cases, and are excited to get into the conversation. But we have seen some more general questions about mobile automation and the Appium framework. Perhaps Jonathan, as the closest to the core of the project, could take a couple of minutes to tackle the question of why Appium.
Sure, yeah. For anyone who's relatively new to mobile automation, maybe has heard about Appium, might not know exactly what it does, what its vision is as a project. Appium is basically a WebDriver compatible front end for a number of different automation technologies. So by WebDriver, I'm referring to the protocol that is used by Selenium. So if you're here today and you've never heard of Selenium or Appium, definitely worth spending some time getting up to speed on both of those concepts. But I'm assuming that you're at least familiar with Selenium, and so Appium is basically the equivalent of Selenium for mobile automation and now other kinds of automation, including desktop application automation, even TV application automation. But the most popular way that people use Appium is certainly to do mobile testing, mobile automation. So why you would choose Appium over any of the other options that are out there? I've been talking a fair amount about this recently, and the answer is basically it depends. It depends on your team, your particular goals with your automation, but really the way that your team is structured and the types of expertise that your team has. So Appium's real sweet spot is for teams that need to automate an app across multiple platforms. For example, if you have the same application that runs on iOS or Android, Appium has sort of the best cross-platform support of all the frameworks that are out there. Another sweet spot for Appium is testing mobile web or hybrid applications. So anytime you have to deal with either a mobile web browser or a web view inside of a hybrid application, Appium has a very natural semantics for moving back and forth between native and web, or simply automating web browsers alone from the get-go. So if all you need is sort of a Selenium for mobile browsers, Appium is kind of a drop-in replacement for the Selenium server. You can reuse all of your same code. Another real thing to consider when choosing a framework is what language you're going to be using to write your tests. And there, Appium, because it's based on the WebDriver protocol, really shines. And you can write WebDriver-based scripts for Selenium, for Appium, in pretty much any programming language you care to talk about. Obviously, some are better supported than others, but all the popular languages have great support for Appium. So there are other things we could talk about, but that's kind of the overall vision of Appium, which is to provide a nice WebDriver interface to different automation technologies for iOS, for Android, for these other platforms. So we do, as the Appium project, the work of translating that WebDriver protocol to whatever the underlying automation technology is, so that you don't have to do that, and so that as those underlying automation technologies change, you can basically just keep writing your Appium scripts. So Appium definitely has a lot going for it. It's not perfect. It's not right for every single situation. that's out there, but for a lot of teams and a lot of requirements, it really is the best option.
Excellent, thanks. Yes, particularly in the mobile web sphere, it's one of the only solutions for iOS and one of the better solutions for Android. Charlene and Charlotte, I know your talk approaches in part the why Appium question as well. Can you give a brief overview of what you're discussing and kind of broach the question from your point of view?
So for our talk, we're going to be kind of drawing a picture of our journey within Capital One, because I previously worked with Charlene as one of the senior automation engineers that spearheaded the iOS effort, and we went through a journey where we did use Appium in the beginning, but it was very janky code and it wasn't as organized as it was with screen objects, which is something that we're going to be expounding on at the Appium conference. So just to give a brief overview of what screen objects is, it's actually a Ruby library that was created by a couple of our members at Capital One, Shripad and Shailendra Jain. And this is a wrapper around Appium that uses modules and accessors to organize elements and being able to define those methods and elements in a more structured way. There was a lot of going back and forth in terms of what framework we were going to use and how we were going to use that, and kind of just reiterating the process that we took and how we did it, and also expanding on those frameworks.
Mm-hmm. We'll also be talking about how we expanded on the framework using AppleTools and Jira X-Ray and the Jenkins server CI/CD.
Yeah, so we were ultimately tasked with completing the pipeline, as we would like to call it, and being able to accomplish that was a great feat for us, especially starting from nothing, basically. Thank you.
Excellent. I look forward to the talk. It should be exciting, interesting. Keeping in the why Appium question, but moving to a little bit different perspective, I guess. Daniel, your talk is from the development perspective, from the other side, not the client. Can you give a little bit of information about your talk and about your experience coming to Appium development?
Sure, definitely. So first, I also give a quick answer to why Appium. For us, I mean, this wasn't really a question, it was the demand. A lot of our customers are using Appium, so we had strong demand from the customers to support it. So there was no question about it at all. My talk would be about basically adding visual testing capabilities to Appium. So if we take web, for example, as a reference, there are plenty of things that are kind of trivial to do and are used for visual testing. For example, scrolling inside a page or an iframe or something like that. And for native apps, this is a little bit more complex and isn't readily available in every platform. So lately what we basically did is added a bunch of such capabilities, such as scrolling inside scrollable elements and getting specific sizes from the application and things that we need to do for image processing that will help us do automatic visual testing. We basically added these capabilities to Appium, and these would be open, and of course anyone can use them. So pretty cool. I'll describe basically the challenges that we encountered and what we decided to do and the architecture. This would be most of the talk.
All right, excellent. And how did you find coming to development of Appium? I know I've been working on it for a number of years and it's kind of grown as I've worked on it, but coming anew to it seems like a daunting task to hit such a large code base and such a complex.
Yeah, definitely. It was a bit overwhelming at first. Basically, as Appium supports multiple platforms, you need to have knowledge both in iOS and in Android, specifically, for example, in JavaScript, the way that Appium is written. So from our part, at least, it required basically experts in both of these fields. We actually had a team, kind of a small team, working specifically on Appium, each one working on their specific platform code, because even within Appium, you need to use specific vendor API, right? You need to use Apple's API in order to perform some, for example, against scrolling in iOS, and for Android, it's something else. So we had developers for both platforms, and we coordinated the addition of these capabilities to be as similar as possible as part of the effort. So a bit overwhelming at first. I think we gained a lot of acquaintance with the Appium code, which is very, very, very cool. I hope that answers the question.
Yes, and well, first off, thank you for the contribution. It's a great thing to have. Also, I hope your talk can excite some people to jump in and start fixing some bugs, fixing whatever needs to happen, or adding features. We're always looking for contributors.
Definitely an interesting experience. Definitely.
Good to hear. So we've heard a little bit about each person's talk. This is the first Appium conference, so we have no history to go on, but I'd like to open it up to everybody to kind of chime in about what sort of things they're excited about, knowing what's going to happen in the conference, and imagining being in a room full of people who use Appium and are excited about it. What's exciting to you about the Appium conference?
So
anyone can answer that.
Yeah, sure. So I'm actually part of organization of few conferences myself, and I think it's basically the way that you create a community. You kind of go over to the next step from just pull requests and communication via GitHub mostly, and you start actually meeting people. You kind of get the feeling of what they actually need, things like context that you can't get from small correspondence. You suddenly get the entire project, you get problems, you get stories about how and why people got into the framework and what they're expecting and everything. I think it would be a great way to get all that, which is a lot of information that you kind of easily miss when you're just working through like electronic communication.
For us,
Go for it. No, after you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think for us, we're excited because aside from it being our first time, we also finally get to meet the creator of Appium. And I think that's like very important to us, because then we get the background of how it was made, and also with the talks and other information that's out there that maybe we don't know, and just that learning curve and having more knowledge about Appium and how we use it on a daily basis would just expand more to a better experience, I think.
Yeah, and just seeing how people have used Appium in their day-to-day and what they've used it for and how they expanded it, and it's just seeing the creativity that comes with that Appium, using Appium. It's very exciting.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I fully agree with what you all have said, and I'm super excited. Obviously, I think that we're gonna have a really interesting start to the conference with Dan and Jason talking about kind of where Appium came from and its history, and then kind of me closing off with where Appium is going, and then everything in between of what people are doing with Appium. And I'm really excited to meet people and talk to people, because every time we talk to people, I learn that people are using an Appium in ways that we never intended, sometimes amazing, sometimes like, why are you doing that? And here's a better way. But really looking forward to hearing about those interesting stories that can then be shared and help other people who are at the conference, or help us to then, write informational articles or how-tos based on the success that they've had, or the workarounds that they've figured out. And for example, for years I've thought Appium can't really be used for game automation, because the way that games are developed are just so different than the way that kind of UI component-based applications are developed. But we had a woman propose an amazing talk on how to use Appium for game automation, and I'm really curious to see how they were able to be successful with that, because I didn't really think it was possible. But here they've done it, so I'm excited for them to share their learnings with the whole group. And yeah, it should just be a lot of fun too. I mean, what Daniel said about building community, this is the first event really outside of Selenium conference or an Appium meetup that's really just about Appium, and really just about bringing people together who are invested in solving problems together with Appium. And I think that a lot of cool relationships will form, mentorship relationships of helping people get going with their projects, or just friendships. Hopefully, I mean, we've got a closing party on the conference day. I think it'll be a really good time. So yeah, I could go on and on, but I'm just really excited about all the aspects of it. And we've been working with a great organizing firm in the UK, and they've just done a great job. So I think it'll be a really great experience for the attendees too, to just be there, and obviously, fun stuff from the sponsors as well. So there you have it.
Excellent. Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to putting a more human face on what is often just GitHub issues, or some discuss.io talks, but just hearing how people are using what we've been putting out into the world seems like a great boon for us. And as you said, there's a talk about Unity games. There's also some interesting talks that kind of expand what we thought of as the use case of Appium, like using backdoors in the application for testing things, or peer-to-peer communications, which we never designed for or thought of how to use, but people have figured that out as they need to do in their apps. So an exciting talk, as well as an exciting hallway track, as they say. So since this is the inaugural Appium conference, and we can't look to past talks or past interactions, I'd like to kind of talk about some of the things from other conferences which have been useful or been good, or that might serve as a model in our minds as we move into this brand new conference. So some either talks that have been great that you've seen, speakers that have been great, even if the talks themselves are not so memorable, or interactions of any sort. Maybe just, lunch was great on that conference day, and that made the conference awesome for me.
Yeah, food is very important. Hopefully the food will be good. I think that when lunch is good, people are generally pretty happy at a conference. So seems kind of a silly thing to say, but I also agree with what you said about the hallway track, and we just have a one-day conference, so there's not going to be a lot of and a single track, so there's not going to be a lot of moving around the hallway, but I hope that the spirit of the hallway track is alive at lunch and during the breaks and the after party, because that is where a lot of the value has come from for me at different conferences, is the random conversations either about the conference material or just that spawn into other interesting discussions. And I think that's where the AppiumConf attendees will get a lot of value too, as they talk to other people who are trying to solve the same problems that they're solving, maybe riffing off of something that someone said in a talk, or just finding out that they both have the same need and can come over and talk to Isaac or myself or the Appium team and let us know, like, hey, we all have this need, and then we'll say, oh, well, we didn't know that. Like, we've been thinking that this was more important. So I'm excited about AppiumConf as an experience for the people who are involved in the project to get a lot of good feedback from our users and help prioritize the kind of work that we do in the future too.
Any other thoughts?
So, yeah, sorry. So for me, at least, things that are a lot of times memorable from conferences is meeting creators or major contributors to a framework is usually one of the most interesting parts of a conference. So you get a sense of someone who is, deeply involved in whatever it is that you're basically working with, and you get a sense of where the product is going, what's the future, or what do they think is the correct way to work with the framework or whatever that is, which is usually something that's missing a lot of time for people who are working with a framework and aren't contributors. Is this the right way to do things is something that's kind of hard to grasp. There's a lot of nuances, and when you get someone who is really deeply involved in the project, then you usually kind of get those nuances as part of the lectures. So I'm thinking this would be definitely something that that would be memorable.
Yes, I agree that as on the other side, on the contributor side, getting feedback in real time is valuable, and seeing how the system is being used, which is often not how we would use the system, not being ourselves necessarily testers or testing any kind of app that's in the real world. So, anything to add, Charlene or Charlotte?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much has been said. Just putting face into the product that you're working on, it's great. I mean, going to conferences, not even just technical conferences, say like a comic book convention, where you're seeing the creator of the what you're using, and it's amazing, and it's like you want to get their autograph or something. So yeah, it's very exciting to see just the face behind the product.
Yeah, and kind of like echoing what Danielle had said, for me, it's always the keynote, because that's like the driving force for me for the rest of the day and for the rest of the talks. I always look forward to the breakout sessions after the keynote, especially if the keynote is very inspiring. And the breakout sessions, the content in themselves, they teach you so many things, especially things where there's gaps knowledge-wise, for myself at least. You always get those from those breakout sessions, and then talking to the speakers afterwards to get into their head and to get into their thoughts. I think that's just one of those experiences that you can only experience at a conference, and it's a great feeling.
Yes, indeed. And the main keynote at AppiumConf is Dan Cuellar and Jason Huggins, so the creator of Appium and the creator of Selenium, in the same talk. So got to be interesting, to say the least, even if it's just Jason's robots running around. All right. So we have an interesting conference coming up, and a lot to be excited about and a lot to look forward to. The same can be said for Appium as a system, as a framework. I know that Jonathan's talk at Appium Conference is about the future of Appium. So I'd like, before getting him to give a little précis of that, I was wondering if any of the other panelists have ideas about the future of Appium, of automated testing, automated mobile testing, where Appium ought to go, even if not perhaps the way that it is going. It's, more perspectives, the better. So we'll open it up to the three of you, and then we'll get to Jonathan and hear his perspective on it.
So with the Appium and our experience with Appium, I personally feel that it can be expanded to so many more things combined. And maybe this is wishful thinking, but maybe combined with Espresso or XUI tests so that we're cross-platform in both cases and we're not just dependent on one staff. There's so many opportunities for expansion for Appium just in itself. For example, let's say the touch actions. Those can be expanded to so many more that are more personable gestures. And aside from that, like, do you have any other, Charlene? I think for me, that's the most important.
Yeah, I mean, just like you said, the cross-platform and XUI test. Yeah.
Thank you.
Daniel, any thoughts?
Sure. So we try to contribute to the future of Appium. Basically, like I said, adding the visual testing capabilities. So that's definitely a direction that we want to see Appium taking part in. So besides that, I would say that perhaps maybe the part for creating some recorder type of applications for Android as well. I know there was the iOS recorder back then, or specifically, I would say that making it even more easily cross-platform, as Charlene already mentioned, might possibly be a direction that that's a good direction to go through. But I have to admit that I myself I'm kind of looking forward to hear what are the plans for Appium in the conference. So you know.
Cool. Well, yeah, I'll try not to, give away everything. Otherwise, you won't need to come to the conference. But I guess there's a couple different dimensions of how we're thinking about the future of Appium. And I need to say from the outset that the Appium project is an open source project, and there are different people contributing, and people contribute for a variety of reasons, and they have their own agendas. Like maybe they're trying to fix a bug that they ran into in their company, or maybe they really care about one particular area of Appium. If Applitools continues to contribute, it'll probably be in the area of screenshots or things that enable visual testing, because that's what your requirements are. So all that to say, there's a real big diversity of direction, and that's a good thing. I mean, that's what makes open source work really well in a lot of cases, where you have different people who are contributing something to scratch their own particular itch, and then that becomes available to the wider community. So I hope that those things continue, and it's just kind of like a continuous sort of bubbling up of what people find valuable. But that's not really a sort of product direction the way that you would expect from a company that has a coherent vision. And so we do have a coherent vision for Appium, and I'm really excited about it, and it goes a lot to what Charlotte and Charlene were saying about the cross-platform nature, supporting new types of automation. So the current standard for iOS automation using Appium actually runs on XUI test under the hood. So pretty much anything you can do with XUI test, you can do with Appium. In some cases more, because we've actually gone and found hidden APIs in XUI test that aren't directly available to people who are using XUI test on its own. And we've incorporated them into Appium's XUI test driver. So if you're using Appium with iOS 11, you're already using XUI test whether you know it or not. And part of Appium's vision is for you to not have to know about it, that you can just use Appium in the same way that you used it 2 years ago, using the same commands on the same apps with the same behavior. And sometimes that's not always humanly possible, because sometimes underlying changes, say between Apple's old automation technology and XUI test, make it impossible to have a true one-to-one mapping between automation behaviors. But the Appium team is committed to doing the best we can to have that mapping and to make migration as easy as possible. So there's already also a beta driver for Espresso. So again, the idea is, people like Espresso, it has certain benefits. Why compete with Espresso? Much better to integrate Espresso into Appium so that if your requirements are such that you need the particular value that Espresso brings, but you'd rather stick with the Appium interface, the WebDriver protocol, and keep your tests and your test architecture mostly the same, then you can do that. Now it's in very early beta, and last time I tried to run it, it exploded. So it's definitely not for general consumption yet, but we're working on it. And so I think that one of the visions for Appium is this kind of outward expansion of support for a greater number of automation technologies, so that you don't have to choose between platform and platform or between framework and framework. You can just choose Appium, and under the hood, we'll call out to whatever the best automation technology is, or you can specify which one you'd prefer for Appium to speak to on your behalf. So that's kind of the outward thing. Of course, that's a really big vision. So for us to execute on that successfully, we'll need a lot of buy-in and a lot of help from different people. We'll need different companies to come in and say, we really buy into this vision. So let's take this driver and really make sure it's good. Because another part of Appium's vision is kind of a solidifying, bringing together of these different tools and making sure that they work really well. Because if we're adding new platforms, but none of them work very well, then overall it's going to be a bad experience. So we still have the obligation of making sure that, our XUI test driver works as well as it can, and our UI Automator 2 driver works as well as it can. And that will require people to kind of become experts in those drivers and to really camp out on them and, figure out how to make them stable. And then in the other element, kind of spanning those two different directions, is compatibility. So making sure that across the different drivers, things generally work the same way. And that extends to our support of the new WebDriver protocol that's been, or in the process of being ratified by the W3C, which comes with a number of changes to the old protocol that Selenium was using. So Appium is committed to incorporating that new protocol with semantics that are as true as possible to what the spec dictates should happen. But there are other things that we could do. For example, one headache, I guess, right now is that if you are getting the page source on iOS and you're getting the page source on Android, they're very different. They're completely different because iOS and Android have different names for their elements, different app hierarchies, and so on. One thing Appium could do is kind of construct a generalized element hierarchy model, a sort of schema that is an umbrella schema over both those other platforms, so that when you're working with Appium, you're just talking about buttons or text fields. You're not talking about XCUI element type buttons or Android.widget.buttons. You don't have to really know those differences between the platforms. Is that even conceptually possible? I think so, but we have to dig into it and do that work based on how valuable that type of cross-platform support is for our users. So I guess in sum, again, there's this kind of outward expansion, this sort of bringing together and solidifying, and then compatibility across the board. And those are sort of the different initiatives for the core of Appium. And then we also have this tool called Appium Desktop, which is really useful for you know, introspecting your application and figuring out how to find locators. And it's the kind of the new version of the old Appium.app and Appium.exe. And we actually are in the process of implementing some record and playback support into that tool, which will really help beginners to Appium take some, you know, basic point and click actions and have a test script output for them that they can use as a learning tool. So there's a lot of exciting things happening for sure. We'll need lots of people to help with all of these different initiatives, and because Appium, you know, has been increasing in popularity for some time, I hope that the more people rely on this tool, the more they'll be willing to see that a small investment in one of these areas can really help the sustainability of the tool as it moves forward. So, thanks.
Excellent. Thank you. The future is both very detailed and wide open. It's a great world out there. So before we finish talking specifically about AppiumConf amongst the panelists, is there anything that anybody would like to close with before we start taking a few of the questions that people have been posing?
Sign up, come, it'll be fun. I'll do something very interesting in my talk, I promise.
Nice. So yes, tickets are still available, and standard tickets are available until the 23rd of March, and then prices go up, I think. The conference is in London, so I know that some people can't get there, but I'm pretty sure things will be recorded and be made available eventually on the World Wide Web. All right, so now we'll take a few of the questions that people have been asking and have asked leading up to the webinar. Not sure that I will get names because I've been kind of going through them as they came, but in the early parts of our discussion, there was some mention of limitations, of drawbacks of Appium as a tool for mobile automation, and we have people from both the development side and the user side. So I thought that we might get some good perspectives on what those limitations are and how to work around them. So anybody can jump in, anybody who has a thought on the matter.
Yeah, I'm curious what Charlotte and Charlene have run into as the primary limitations of the tool.
So I think one of the limitations that I've encountered is, you know, we try to achieve polyformism as much as we can, but there's just some differences between iOS and Android. One of those examples is like touch actions. I'm sorry. There's a different scroll method for Android, specifically for Android, and then there's a scroll method specifically for iOS. I think in that sense, like it would be nice if there was just one scroll method for both that could work for both, so that we don't have to refer one or the other. And another thing to that is touch action in general for iOS was a little bit difficult to implement. I mean, Appium community is helpful and there's always a workaround, but it's the headache of having to find that workaround. And then once you implement it, it's good, but just the journey of like having to look for it, determining what it is and all that. But otherwise, Appium for us and how we did our test, it's pretty good and it's pretty keen. Those are just some of the nuances that we've experienced.
I will personally apologize for the touch action weirdness. It was one of the first things as a new programmer to the team, or a new person on the Appium team, that I implemented. I think it was the second feature that I originally implemented, and it's been kind of been a headache ever since. So sorry, Daniel, I cut you off there for a moment.
No, man, that was that was cool to hear. So for at least from our point, it was very I wouldn't say trivial, but like I said, and like Jonathan mentioned, we care mostly about the visual capabilities, and Appium basically had some major features that we were missing that would allow us to get the images that we want in order to actually be able to perform comparisons. So basically, this is what we added. We added capabilities which solves those drawbacks. But examples are basically, we got images with the status bar, which is usually less interesting to people who want to test their application visually. Scrolling in a deterministic way. This is actually not really Appium's fault. It's a problem with the general vendor API, but we've managed to do something about that as well. Sizes, rotation, stuff like that, like information that was actually missing for us, and hopefully in the next version of Appium will be available. So
yes, you bring up a good point that a lot of Appium's work under the hood is kind of pasting over some of the vendor provided oddities, the things that either are provided and work, in different ways in different situations, or aren't provided and need to be worked around. So some of the limitations come from that. Perhaps Jonathan can speak to the developer side, like more under the hood side of limitations.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just like you said, Isaac. There's kind of two categories of things that can be wrong with Appium. One, you can have bugs in our code or things that we've implemented incorrectly. And two, there can be limitations in the underlying technology. So the reason that touch actions are hard to get working on iOS is because they're hard to get working in XUI test appropriately in the generalized way that we need them to work in Appium. And sometimes there are just bugs and things that are broken in those underlying technologies, and then we're sort of dead in the water, especially with Apple, where we can't even go read the code and figure out what might be wrong. We just have to find workarounds. So I'd say that the overall situation with Appium is either there's an Appium bug, in which case let us know and we'll fix it, or it's an underlying automation technology issue, and Appium is probably already doing something to make that better than it would be on its own. So there are tons of limitations in mobile automation, but there's not a lot of them that we can do anything ourselves about because we don't work at Apple and Google. And ultimately, it would be great if those companies came on board with something like Appium's vision, really listened to the Appium users talking about what their requirements are, and then exposed those kinds of behaviors in their tools, because that's what people need. So
yes, indeed. So we have a few questions that have come up, kind of taking on our discussion of the future of Appium, the future of testing. One is about the conceptual changes around testing and this move to minimize UI testing. And since Appium is largely a UI or UX testing framework, how do you see the world moving forward with this agile tendency to accentuate what used to be the bottom of the pyramid? I don't know what it is now, pizza slice or Dorito or whatever. Minimizing UI testing, going for integration testing, that sort of thing. Anybody have any opinions on where UI testing stands as we move into that future?
Okay, so I'll start. So obviously, we're very pro UI and integration testing in general. I can basically list the advantages of such, let's say, a strategy for testing. I would say that if I want to be a little bit have a little criticism of basically of my own approach. I would say that probably the right combination for everything is doing some of each type of testing anyway. I mean, I cannot see a production system that has no integration tests, something that has front end and has no UI testing. That's simply inconceivable to me. I mean, I have no idea what other ways are there to test it, and manually testing everything sounds extremely daunting. So I think UI testing in general has a lot of advantages. It should take a large part of testing in general. It's actually the only way you can go end-to-end testing with your system. And this is not saying that you shouldn't do unit testing or even component testing, in addition. I mean, so from my perspective, at least, integration tests are definitely here to stay, and even to take as frameworks such as Appium or Express or XUI, if we're talking about mobile, but Selenium, for example, for the web, as these become more and more accessible and easy to work with, I think it will actually take a larger part of testing, because you can cover a lot of ground doing integration testing and UI testing without the need to do like more low-level type of unit testing. You can get a lot of ROI doing that. So at least from my perspective, I think that that's not going to go away anytime soon. I think it's going to take a larger and larger part of the testing suite in general. And that's it.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And the problem people encounter with writing lots of functional tests is that they get confused about the kind of functional test they should be writing. They think that they should have a functional test for every single edge case, but that's what unit tests are for, to enter an input string in 50 different ways and see if it breaks your parsing method. You don't want a functional test for that. That's just crazy. But you do want a functional test of the main flows of your application. So I mean, there are companies and people out there that have put everything into the integration end-to-end functional side, and that's probably a bad idea. But you can't go the other way and just have everything be unit tests, because these just are different kinds of tests that give you different kinds of feedback. Functional tests are much higher fidelity, and that's what you need for much higher confidence, especially as you approach a release. But do you run every functional test every time you save a file in your editor? No, that's crazy. But you can probably run a couple thousand unit tests every time you save a file and get very instant feedback. So it's kind of this trade-off between fidelity of feedback and cost or time of feedback, and you want to have a balanced approach to that. But we shouldn't talk about getting rid of integration tests or whatever. But if you're one of these people that's done a lot too much of it and relied too heavily on it, then maybe you should focus on the integration end-to-end tests, which are really valuable for you, and you'll be happier anyway, because then you'll have fewer opportunities for weird integration issues that are non-deterministic due to network or due to underlying technology instability or whatever.
Yes, this seems particularly true in the mobile space, where the device fragmentation is so large that end-to-end testing can't really be done anyway other than automatedly, and cover the devices that even a reasonably, even a small sampling of people would actually be using. So yes, no, not going anywhere yet, even with Agile pushing for it. Yeah, we're about out of time. There's been one question that's come up a number of times, specifically about Appium Conference, and that was that I don't know the answer to other than my own answer, and that is why London. And my answer is that I want to go to London, but I'm not sure why London was chosen.
Well, I can answer that because when we started looking at AppiumConf, we actually originally planned it for fall of last year. And in advance of that, we ran a survey with a number of different cities around the world, seeing which people would be interested in traveling to or able to travel to. And London was far and away the winner. So I think we talked about London, Vancouver, San Francisco, New York, Berlin, I don't know, a couple places like that. My hypothesis is that being an international community, London is, on average, an easier place to get to. Maybe the visa situation is easier for different people getting into the UK. I'm not really sure, but it won, and that's where we decided to have the first one. But second one will probably be somewhere else. So hopefully it's awesome, and we have a second one.
All right. Yes, that's a great answer. Open sourcing our location. So I just want to close by saying that I'm really excited about Appium Conference. I'm excited about Appium in general, but Appium Conference coming up, I'm excited to meet everybody, the three of you that I haven't met, and also everybody that's listening and everyone that's coming. I'm super excited about the community that is coming together around Appium at this conference. Any parting words from you?
None for me. Yeah, looking forward to seeing you all in April.
Yes, looking forward to everyone.
Yep, excited to see y'all, excited to meet everyone, and excited for London.
Same here, of course. See you all.
Hey everyone, this is Bill McGee from Sauce Labs. I really want to thank the panelists and Isaac for a great conversation today. As was mentioned at the outset of the presentation, we will be sending out an email with a link to the recording. And keep an eye out for it, because we will also be including a nice discount code for anyone who does want to go to Appium Conference and is able to get out to London on April 6th, and the workshop's on April 5th. So it's the top of the hour. I wish you all a very good day and hope to see you in London.